On January 15, 2022, in a mid-sized tech startup located in Austin, Texas, a team of developers working on a prototype for a smart home device identified a significant vulnerability in their software. The flaw allowed potential unauthorized access to users' personal data, posing a risk to the privacy and security of future customers. Initially, the developers viewed this issue as a typical software bug that could be managed and resolved in forthcoming updates. They conducted initial assessments of the vulnerability, focusing on internal debugging processes. However, after a series of discussions, the team opted to address this flaw in the next planned software update, rather than issuing an immediate alert to internal stakeholders or external parties. They underestimated the significance of the vulnerability and the potential consequences of its exploitation, prioritizing developmental timelines over critical assessments of security risks. As the startup moved forward, the prototype entered a limited market release. The decision to withhold disclosure of the vulnerability proved crucial. The company's marketing strategy emphasized the innovative aspects of the device, citing advanced integration with existing smart home ecosystems. This marketing success led to the acquisition of initial users who trusted the brand's representation of security and reliability. However, unbeknownst to them, a group of hackers monitored the startup's activities and recognized the opportunity presented by the overlooked vulnerability. In early March 2022, the hackers successfully exploited the flaw, launching a coordinated attack on the prototype software. This breach granted them access to thousands of users' personal data, including sensitive information such as addresses, schedules, and integrated smart device controls. The hackers began to disseminate this data across various dark web forums, further compounding the potential for misuse. As reports of the breach emerged, panic ensued among users. Customers took to social media platforms to express their concerns and frustrations, amplifying the situation's visibility and urgency. The startup faced immediate backlash. Their initial dismissal of the vulnerability now seemed like a significant oversight. In response to the breach, the company initiated its first steps toward damage control. Press releases were crafted to address the situation, and an urgent meeting was convened with key stakeholders. However, the delay in responding to the breach significantly hindered their efforts. By mid-March, the breach had escalated to the point that regulatory authorities began their inquiry into the company's security protocols and decisions. Investigative teams scrutinized the startup's practices, focusing on the decision-making processes that led to the initial failure to disclose the vulnerability. Authorities expressed concerns about the overall impact on consumer trust and data protection standards. Significant media coverage followed the original breach announcement, exposing the company's negligence to a broader audience. News outlets reported on the vulnerability, emphasizing the implications for customer privacy and the startup's lack of transparency. As a result, users began to withdraw their trust in the brand. Customer satisfaction numbers plummeted, and users started to deactivate their accounts or uninstall the device altogether. This loss of consumer confidence led to a noticeable decline in sales and a stall in previously expected market growth. By early April 2022, as scrutiny deepened, the startup started to see a cascade of negative ramifications. Calls for regulatory action intensified, and institutional responses became more formalized. The board of directors convened extensively to reconsider the company's strategies moving forward. The developers who had initially downplayed the severity of the software flaw found themselves at the center of an internal investigation. Amidst this turmoil, many employees expressed their concerns about the company's future and their job security. A reevaluation of risk management protocols began, but the damage to the organization's credibility was already significant. In tandem with these organizational shifts, rival companies began to capitalize on the situation. Market competitors launched their products as alternatives, highlighting their own security measures and reliability in the face of the startup's uncertainty. Customers who had lost faith in the compromised brand exhibited a willingness to explore options that marketed safety and protection. Sales figures for the startup continued to flag as users opted for products perceived as safer. By May 2022, the startup's reputation had deteriorated substantially. Regulatory authorities recommended harsh penalties and potential sanctions based on their investigation into the breach. Compliance teams initiated a formal review of existing data protection policies and measures. The company seek compensation for damages incurred due to the data breach. Legal fees began to accrue, further straining financial resources and detracting from recovery efforts. In June 2022, amidst continued pressure, the startup received an acquisition proposal from a larger rival technology company. The acquiring firm promised to absorb the struggling brand, though such a process would lead to the dissolution of the core development team. This was a significant shift, as the initial group behind the prototype would disband. Investors started to consider exit strategies, posturing to mitigate losses from the failing startup. The acquisition ultimately marked an end to the original vision that the developers had for the product. Throughout the latter half of 2022, the startup's remaining activities focused on fulfilling regulatory compliance requirements and addressing the repercussions of the breach. However, internal morale had deteriorated, and many employees opted to resign or seek opportunities elsewhere. The new leadership team from the acquiring company moved in, initiating changes to restructure the remaining framework and personnel. The once innovative startup that had pioneered efforts in the smart home space became a cautionary tale within the tech industry. As 2023 began, the original vision and potential of the startup were compromised. The acquisition had stripped away the foundational team responsible for its innovation, leaving behind a faceless entity tasked with reconciling past failures. Branding efforts pivoted towards damage control, focusing on restoring consumer trust under new management. Despite these actions, the fragmentation of the original team served as a reminder of the startup's swift decline from a promising enterprise to part of a larger corporate structure, a cautionary representation of what can ensue from inadequate security measures. The smart home device, now rebranded under the larger company's umbrella, struggled to regain footing in a competitive landscape, significantly altered by concerns over security and consumer data protection. The legacy of the vulnerability and the decisions that led to its exploitation lingered in the background, shaping the narratives of both the startup's former team and the evolving landscape of smart technology. The ongoing repercussions left a significant imprint on industry standards and consumer expectations, marking a pivotal shift in how personal data security is